Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Friday legislative webinar for Friday, June 20th. I'm Kevin Toon, Communications Director for the LOC, sitting in for Patty Mulvihill, who's traveling today on LOC business. Welcome to our latest webinar, and now with just 9 days remaining in the legislative session until adjournment on the 29th. Quick couple of housekeeping items before we get rolling here. If you have not yet done so, please make sure your microphone is muted. And second, we will end promptly at 1 o'clock. I've also put some instructions in the chat for how to add your city name to your city name to your on-screen name. We do this because when we go to Q&A, we want to be able to take questions from our members first. This week, we have several priority bills that we need to discuss with you. Nearly all of them require some sort of action by our members. And this is not surprising considering we are literally in the final days of the legislative session. Lots of information to get to you today. We'll move through it as quickly and efficiently as we can so that we can get to your questions after the presentations from our lobbyists. Here is an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're actually going to start with the transportation package, some urgent developments this week that we need you to help us out with. We'll move then to transient lodging tax, also a bill that saw significant movement this week. More to tell you in a moment. We have some new information on a topic we've touched on now and again on these webinars, wildfire funding. We'll have some new information on that. We'll also hear about a bill related to water rights transfers, a bill related to behavioral health funding, and then we have a late addition to tell you about a problematic public contracting bill that the LOC is opposing. So those are our top bills of the week. Following that, we'll have an update on House Bill 2321, which is the property tax reform study and work group bill. And then finally, a reminder about state shared revenue, a state shared revenue related deadline that is coming up. So because of the volume of information we have to cover, we ask that you keep your questions till the very end. You can certainly submit them in the chat or raise your hand as we're going along. So we'll know that you have a question. We'll try to get through all of our presentations from our lobbyists before we go to the question and answer session. So we're going to bring in now Jim McCauley, LLC Legislative Director, and he is going to walk us through these one bill at a time, starting with his own. Jim, today's article in the bulletin says that things have reached critical mass with the transportation package. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin. Hello, everybody. I appreciate you joining us today. And as Kevin gave you the preamble on this, we are in the closing days of session. So it is often a scramble, magnified tenfold or more. There'll be any number of different communications that we've got coming out from myself or other members of the government affairs team here as we close it on the final end of the session, because we still have any number of our priority bills that we'd like to get through the process. We've got funding that needs to get some kind of attachment to some of those policy bills and any other number of issues and stuff that we're dealing with here with the final closing stages. So transportation, this obviously remains a priority of ours. It was a priority selected by the League's membership, and we're still hopeful. I mean, there is all sorts of, I'll say, conversations that are taking place with the co-chairs from the Transportation Committee and leadership, and they're working certainly their own phone lines with their own caucus members to try to get everybody in the same place and trying to work on a transportation package that can move through the session. Remember, this is a 3/5 vote, and that is a high bar. This is not just a 30 plus 1 or a 15 plus 1 in the Senate. So they need to have that 3/5 margin, and it's going to be difficult for them to get there. So this is where you come in. This really comes down to your own advocacy, your outreach to your legislators, and being able to focus your attention on the significance and the importance of this transportation package in your own community. With the bulletin article today and in previous ones, we've been giving you basically a snapshot on what projections look like for your own community. So we have actually what that state highway fund allocation looks like in every city in the state. Our counterparts with the League, with the Association of Oregon Counties have got a similar type of chart as well for the county side of this thing. Safe to say that in all likelihood, if this package, as it's presented or it's been presented here so far, moves through, as you can expect almost a doubling of your current state highway fund. So if you're a community that's getting $500,000 a year, by 2030, that 500,000 will be nearly $1 million. And I think with the scale of this investment, many communities are going to be able to deal with the backlog, whether it's you've got bridge repairs in your communities or whether you've got just the basics of potholes, surface treatments, curbs, or any other number of safety projects that you haven't been able to get to because you just flat out don't have the funding for it. So I think those are really simple messages for folks. I mean, we all realize that fixing potholes and getting surface overlayment and things of that nature doesn't exactly get a ribbon cutting, but those are some of those fundamental or core transportation infrastructure pieces that are important, I think, to every community. So keep up the contact with your legislators, continue to emphasize how important this transportation package is. And with any luck, we'll find out at the end of the session, because I truly think that this is going to not materialize until literally the last day of session, to make sure that we do get a transportation package through. The last thing we want to have happen is come up empty-handed and push this off into a future session. That just means costs are going to increase. Your streets are going to get worse. And for a number of communities, it may mean potentially additional layoffs. We know that the state, if they don't get a transportation package, is looking at pretty significant reduction in staffing, primarily within their operations and maintenance. And that means that all of those state highways that have backlogs, again, whether it's bridge repair or the surfaces and things of that nature that need to get fixed, they're not going to get fixed. So in these final few days of session, continue the outreach. It's been terrific so far. I continue to receive comments coming from the committee members. We need to make sure that we keep that communication going. So again, thank you very much, and step it up, because we're going to need another notch of communication here going forward, not just for transportation, but literally everything else that we talk about today. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and shift back to transient lodging tax. That's House Bill 3962. Jenna, major milestone this week. We need one more chamber to get through, so take us where we're at.
Yeah, so the transient lodging tax bill passed yesterday by one vote in the House. So it was a very, very, very tough and hard fought win to get it through the House. So first and foremost, thank you so much for everyone who's reached out to their House members and Senate members if you're already ahead of the game on the transient lodging tax bill. I will say that both sides, us and our friends at the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, are blowing up people's inbox. So legislators keep going back and forth on where they're going to land. So that's what brings me here to say, please continue to reach out to your legislators, even if you've already done it. Quick text, call, email, hey, you're still good on transient lodging tax. If you get a firm yes from your legislator, your senator, please let me know. I'm trying to see where we're at and where we need to do some work and apply some extra touches. The bill will likely be scheduled for a public hearing and possible work session on Monday afternoon. It might not post until Sunday or Monday morning. So keep your eyes out. I will send an action alert, but if you have any testimony from earlier iterations of the bill. I have done a bulletin article that's got new sample testimony that's updated with what this version of the bill does. And for a reminder, it changes the 70-30 split for post 2003 taxes to be 40-60. So 40% towards tourism promotion and tourism related facilities, and 60% discretionary. I will say one thing I heard on the floor yesterday of big confusion is that local governments agreed to pay for tourism with that industry in 2003. We did not. The state preempted us. The state made that decision. The state made that deal when they implemented their transient lodging tax. We've just been stuck with it for the last 22 years. I think the other thing is that folks are not necessarily drawing the line that if you have discretionary funds in your general fund, you can fund things like public safety and infrastructure, or other things like parks, trails, all of that stuff. So if you can make that comment to your folks, that would be really helpful. Lastly, if you have anyone who's on the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee, please ask them to vote it out on Monday. In that bulletin article, there's a link to the members of the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee. If it's not your senator who's on that committee, feel free to send them a copy of any testimony or written materials that you have in support of TLT as well, because they are the first step. And then once it gets out of that committee, it will head to the floor. And I know it's a tight time frame, but I'm hopeful. This is the furthest we've ever gotten, and folks really don't usually make us work these bills unless they're actually going to go somewhere. So we have to continue to apply pressure, and have as much of a presence as our friends at the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, who are on the opposite side of this. So thank you all for what you've done so far.
Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate it. And again, the significance of where we're at right now cannot be overstated. We've never been this far. We've got one more chamber to clear. And a lot of the reason why we were able to get this through yesterday's on a floor vote has to do with your continued persistence and contact with legislators. So right now we're only working with 30 senators. So it's 15 plus 1 to be able to get this thing through. So let's keep the heat on, keep that contact going forward. Definitely appreciate the effort that folks have been involved with so far, but a little bit further here. I'm going to finish up with my piece here on wildfire funding. This is House Bill 3940. Kind of interesting on where things have gone with that whole conversation this session. I think for the quick background for folks, I'll just say this, that Oregon has always been habitually difficult to, I'll say, get a stable wildfire funding. And it's gotten worse over the years, certainly over the last couple of years. Last year, they had to call a special session to come up with, I'll just say, roughly $200 million to pay vendors, which is ridiculous. That's not something that you should have to do. That's something that should be baked into the overall funding package, the overall budgeting process. So I was part of a work group that started really right about now, last year, trying to come up with some new funding options. And that's one area that we did not have a whole lot of success at, trying to identify additional, funding options that had not previously been thought of or taxed. There were probably more than 70 different options that we looked at. The vast majority of what was recommended out of that work group was essentially a general fund move or a push, but so much of the general fund has already been spoken for. And again, a lot of difficulty trying to identify new funding sources. However, something's emerged here in the last month or last week and a half, I will say. This is the synthetic tobacco pouches. It's a product line that isn't taxed currently, and House Bill 3940 sets it up for a 65-cent per can tax capable of generating somewhere around $30 million, $30 million over a biennium. That's a helpful piece of the puzzle. There's also dedication in that bill of 20% of the rainy day funds for wildfire wildfire fighting as well. Now, specifically, it's more on the mitigation side and resilience as well as home hardening. So that piece is going to be helpful, but combined between the tax on the synthetic tobacco and this 20% dedication of the rainy day fund, it brings it up to about $60 million and will be a substantial help on the overall mitigation of those wildfire issues that we face. So please do reach out. Let your legislators know that you support House Bill 3940. It's going to be up for possible third reading or essentially on the floor, House floor next week. But we still need to be able to get the votes out there. And there is opposition. Certainly the healthcare interests and things of that nature don't want to see this type of funding pushed to wildfire. They prefer it to go to, again, where other tax revenue goes from tobacco. This is a unique opportunity for us to take advantage of a funding source that we've never really had access to before. It will help with some of the stabilization for some of that wildfire mitigation. And then I'll say more importantly, this 20% component of that wildfire funding here, the 20% of the, the rainy day fund is actually in permanency. So that's something that's from here on out will be part of the overall wildfire mitigation. So that's going to be incredibly important. And then the other message for you really comes down to we need more money than that. There was a $240 million gap roughly. So we're hoping to see that type of funding come up in the final Christmas tree bill. That's the expectation, is that we're going to see somewhere around $180 million or more emerge in that funding. And then again, that's going to be incredibly important because of the readiness, being able to get all the fire agencies, air resources out there. So be sure to, again, in part of that contact with your legislators, make sure that they understand that wildfire funding is important, support House Bill 3940, and then also the additional wildfire needs for readiness and for firefighting during the course of the season. So I'm going to shift a little bit here, and Michael Martin, we'll bring you on. You can talk about Senate Bill 1153. This is a water right transfer bill that we spent a fair amount of time on. So Michael, tell us where we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So just a quick update. I've talked about the water right transfer bill. Want to be very clear, this bill was the biggest threat to municipal water rights that we've seen in a long time. And there were a lot of people working on this effort. We have a municipal carve out in the -10 amendments, but knock on wood here. I was just told that the bill is not going to be going forward. So the good news is that the bill is dead and we don't have this threat on municipal water rights transfer process. But the bad news is there's no municipal carve out going forward. So if there are future discussions, certainly have a place to start. I think, a lot of my colleagues that I've talked with, we're just, this bill kind of came late in the process in session and not really having the discussions that were needed prior to. It is a very complex topic, but bottom line, doesn't look like we're seeing this bill go forward. Of course, as you'll hear from Scott and others, there's still several days to go. So anything could happen, but that's the quick update. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So if this bill is not going to go forward, we're likely going to be dealing with this issue in the next session or perhaps the next full session in 27.
It's possible. I don't see it going away, anytime soon, but hard to say if it would come back in the short session or next long session at this point.
Super. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate it. Okay, so with that, let's continue to move on here. Next up for discussion is House Bill 2005, Behavioral Health. Scott Winkles, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Scott Winkles, your general government and human resources lobbyist. We're going to talk 2005. This is sort of an omnibus behavioral health package. It's got something in there that's the members have said is very, very important to them. And there are some other things in that bill that make it complicated. In the chat, I've attached the summary, the analysis of the bill provided by the legislative legislative staff. Goes through the bills on the good news. On the positive side for this bill, it contains significant changes to Oregon civil commitment statute. And so this is the statute that allows the state to require a person to receive behavioral health care if they're been determined to be a danger to themselves or others. The changes in the bill for this bill that will make it easier and more effective for people who really do need that intensive level of care is that it removes any temporal reference to when that harm might occur. And so under the previous court rulings and statute, that threat had to be imminent. So that you had to be an immediate threat to themselves or somebody else. That's really hard for a clinician to say definitively that it's going to happen imminently, or immediately. And so even though people could recognize that there's likely in the foreseeable future that a person would be in a position where they're not able to take care of themselves, harm themselves or harm another person. Now we have the new standard is that it has to be likely foreseeable. So a big change, and it also refers to the ability of a person to meet their basic needs. And so if they're not able to, excuse me, so if they're not able to feed themselves, provide, take care of their basic functions, that would also be a grounds for a person to be civilly committed. It would also create some definitions for extremely dangerous individuals. Small number of those people who would meet that criteria, but it does address that problem. This has been Oregon's inability to civilly commit people who have been a threat to themselves or others has really led to tragedy after tragedy in the state. And I think it's good the legislature has finally recognized and dealt with this. The bill comes out, that portion of the bill has the support of the defense attorneys, the prosecuting attorneys, the league, counties. I think we're all on board with that. Problematically in the bill, it does also do some things that are negative for our public safety partners, and it also has some superseding authority in there for licensed behavioral health facilities. It would allow those facilities to be licensed in industrial commercial zones, and also but would prohibit a local government from requiring a variance or a conditional use permit. But that does limit it to facilities that are actually licensed by OHA and meet those requirements. There's an existing federal preemption that interplays here, so it's not a total and complete new that we're preempted on. This isn't new. I mean, the Federal Fair Housing Act has and case law has limited the ability of cities to limit these types of facilities. It's also recognizing that Oregon is desperately short supply of places for people to go. And so that's sort of the impetus of this legislation. There's also some language in there that is a little troublesome on how long a person could be held prior to establishing if they are able to aid and assist in their own defense. And so it puts some timelines in there that I think our partners at the District Attorneys Association are concerned with. So we have organizations that are in our coalition that are opposed to the bill, that are neutral on the bill, even though everybody recognizes that there's components of this that really do help the state. So that's where we're at. I think the bill, the really important question in the bill is how much money is going to be appropriated into it, and that conversation is going to take place at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So that's where we're at. it's not an easy one here, folks. It's got some things there's plenty of in here that cities have asked for a long time, and there are some concerning things that I think we're going to have to revisit in February or in the next long session.
Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Scott. And again, I think everybody notices now the Friday before the end of the session, everything is pretty much on the top end in terms of the work that we're doing, the significance of the work, and also all of the outreach that's going to need to take place here to help us bring some of these things across the finish line. Before I step away from some of the legislative work, we've got a legislative update here from Jenna Jones back on property tax reform. This is 2321.
Yeah, so last week House Bill 2321 passed out of the House and it passed out this, it's a property tax study bill that would create a work group in coordination with AOC and LOC to study the impacts of property taxes and propose changes to the property tax system. This is the first step. I think I've said it many times that if we want actual like property tax reform, we need the legislature to buy into that. And also be able to bring some negotiating power to look at the global tax picture. So our legislative branch brings, the ability to offset some things with income taxes and other revenue sources that they have. And so this passed out of the House. It passed out of the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee this morning, or not this morning, earlier this week on party lines. And so if you're talking to your senator, on any of these other issues, just mention something nice about property tax because it will be headed to the Senate floor sometime soon. But I'm hopeful it will pass, and then we'll get to the good work of trying to fix Measure 5 and 50.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Kevin, I know I missed something in sequence here. I think you want to bring back Nolan?
Well, we had an update from Scott. So for those who are on the call, the LOC team has a chat going here on our cell phones where we might have some breaking updates. So Scott, did you have something you wanted to share about a call you received earlier today about an insurance related bill?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things that's just going to happen until they actually sine die. It's probably towards the end times, everything comes up from the dead, which is true of sine die as well. So we have an insurance bill that we thought was that had been sitting on a presiding officer's desk for a few months, and now appears to be moving. It adds insurance. Some insurance products to the Unfair Trade Practices Act, and it's designed to get at policies where homeowners are impacted in fire-prone areas. However, they wrote it so broadly, it covers many types of insurance, and so SAFE is involved on the workers' comp side, CIS is involved, and frankly, all of this is happening in the last hour, so I'm still trying to get it up to speed before I go into the legislature and do meetings on it. But we're going to see I think we could see a lot of this stuff happen where agreements get made quickly and things start to pop before they actually gavel out, which I'm hearing is Wednesday, but that seems optimistic to me.
Yeah. Scott, do we have an actual bill number on this?
Yeah, it's 174.
Okay. So Senate Bill 174?
Yeah, Senate Bill 174.
Okay.
It's
and the basic message for contact with legislators on this is
don't do it.
Don't do it.
It's too late in the session and it hasn't had a full vetting, and we haven't fully analyzed the impacts to all of the spectrum of insurance products and services that could be impacted. I think it goes well beyond the homeowner policies in fire-prone areas.
Okay.
Which, I mean, that's a legitimate issue that does need to be addressed, as many of you know. But it's you're also talking about class action lawsuits for any number of types of insurance that could be impacted. So not ideal.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate the additional detail on that one. Nolan, let's get you on here so you can talk about I believe a public contracting bill.
Yes, a not so fun one that we kept hoping just would not move. So many of you should have actually received an action alert both last week and additional to earlier today. Also includes an updated coalition one pager opposing House Bill 2688. This bill expands the definition of public works for the purpose of applying the prevailing wage rate to off-site manufacturing that includes, quote, bespoke, end quote, off-site fabrication, pre-construction, assembly, or construction work performed specifically for and in accordance with specifications for public works projects. Our big concerns is that the language in the bill is too broad and would encompass projects that even the proponents don't believe it should cover. We're nervous about the potential increase to cost for transportation projects, as well as those related to water infrastructure. Some of the points we're also hitting upon with Democrats is we expect for local renewable energy and energy resilience projects also to increase. The bill applies to manufacturers in states outside of Oregon as well as internationally, even though proponents agree that Oregon does not have jurisdiction to enforce the bill beyond Oregon. And again, we expect this to increase cost as well as the administrative burdens for manufacturers inside and outside of Oregon. It could provide challenges to finding manufacturers that are willing to do public works projects in Oregon, especially in smaller rural areas where that is already a challenge. It will make Oregon manufacturers less competitive on the market, as well as to create an incentive to work with manufacturers outside of Oregon. And the current prevailing wage for offsite manufacturing that is currently in law is much narrower than what the bill aims for, and thus the impacts is more negligible. This language, again, is much broader, and current prevailing wage rates for offsite than offsite manufacturing. I should note that proponents do have a flow chart that outlines what they believe is impacted, and they're trying to use that to show that this is narrower. We do not believe the language in the bill actually reflects the flow chart, and if it goes to court, we do not think that the courts will agree with the proponents of the bill. The bill is currently scheduled for a vote in the Full Ways and Means Committee this afternoon. We do expect it to pass and then head to the House floor earlier next week, where we also expect it to pass. It's our expectations that there will be a Senate vote as early as next Wednesday. So we are asking you to please contact your senators and ask them to oppose House Bill 2688 in its current form. You can also encourage them to create a work group to address the loopholes that the proponents are trying to solve for. I also want to note that our main focus is Senate Democrats, since this has mostly been a partisan vote so far. So if your senator is a Democrat, please reach out to them as soon as possible by phone, email, and text. If your senator is a Republican, please make sure they are going to continue to oppose the bill, which they most likely are. And if you contact them, please thank them for their opposition. Encourage them to lift up those concerns with their colleagues, as well as on the Senate floor next week when it inevitably will show up there. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you didn't receive that action alert, my contact information is in the chat. Please reach out to me and I'll forward that to you as well.
Yeah, super. Thanks very much for that, Nolan. Let's see. One final piece here, Kevin, is to
Correct.
bring Jenna back in.
That's right.
On state shared revenue reminder.
My guess is Jenna. There she is.
Sorry,
Things are,
I
no,
had
things are
to
crazy right now. Yeah.
learn how to use technology again. This is just a reminder. I love making sure that all of you member cities continue to keep as much revenue as you can. So in the bulletin today, there's a reminder about the state shared revenue certification. You need to send a copy of a signed resolution or ordinance to the Department of Administrative Services. They have likely reached out to your city manager or finance director with a survey that you kind of fill out and attach your paperwork to. You need to get that into them by July 31st. So you still have a whole nother month, but because budget season is winding down and we're about to go into the new fiscal year, there's no time like the present. So if you haven't done that already, please do it. And yeah, keep your state shared revenues. They're important.
Okay, super. Thanks very much for that. So Kevin, we're at Q&A time, right?
That is correct. I just put a link in the chat to the bulletin reminder about SSR, state shared revenue, if folks on the call have questions about that. Jim, I think before we dive into questions, would it be fair to say that given, that the sand is literally almost out of the hourglass on the legislative session, that we could see a flurry of activity. We should expect to see a flurry of activity over the next several days, not only inside the building, but in terms of outreach from you and your team, in terms of action needed from the membership. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. These final days of session, we're going to be on a 1-hour clock for hearings, for amendments, for all sorts of things. And there are going to be times that we're going to have an immediate outreach, and it may be targeted to with a particular legislator or group of legislators. But bottom line, like any other time of the year, the immediacy of your response is incredibly helpful. Phone, text message if you've got them, emails, et cetera, et cetera. So we're definitely going to be ramping that up here over the next 4 or 5 days. So with any luck, we're not going to have a need for a call on Friday of next week in terms of any kind of action alerts that are going on, because session will be over with.
So a couple of logistical things to tell the members about. On a very simple level, simply just keep tabs on your email inbox, because you could be receiving direct emails from Jim or one of his lobbyists. And typically those emails will have the picture you see. For example, if you're looking at the screen here on Zoom, you might see a picture of Jim or a picture of Nolan at the top of these emails saying from your LOC lobbyist. Pay close attention and look for those over the next 5 to 7 days, because they are a call to action. The other way we will communicate this to you is an action alert email from the league itself. So that you might describe that as more of like an email from the mothership LOC saying, all hands on deck. We need this kind of action on this particular legislation. So on a separate note, want to say thank you to all the members who have consistently shown up on Fridays for these calls. We consistently see anywhere from 60 to 75 different cities represented here, of all sizes, from the biggest down to populations of less than 200 showing up on this for the latest information on policy and legislation that might be affecting your city. So we want to thank you for that. It's really going to be sort of a day-to-day assessment as to whether we'll do a call next week. So again, just watch your email. We will keep you posted on whether this will be happening again at 12 o'clock next week. So now let's pivot to Q&A, Jim. And the first question I did see land in the chat was related to transportation. And I believe it was from Mayor Cross in Toledo, asking kind of what were the sticking points that are causing the current issues with the transportation funding package. He says, that's exactly what he says. What are the sticking points that we can address directly within the transportation bill?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, that's really what this comes down to. They've spent, I'll just say, the entire session trying to create a bipartisan package, trying to get some Republicans involved. As far as I know, the communication channels are still there with Republicans. There are still conversations taking place. I think ultimately what this comes down to is there's a lot of concern out there about the cost of this. We recognize that, we've got a 15-cent gas tax increase coming over the next 5 years. We know that we're going to have registration fee increases. There are other taxes on the purchase of new vehicles. There's a payroll tax increase that's rolled out over a number of years as well. All those things become additive, and I think people get very concerned about just kind of the scale of it. What I can offer, I think the best defense that we've got is every single city in Oregon is going to be getting a significant increase in their state highway fund. That's going to go to fund a lot of backlog of your core maintenance and operations. And I know that's not, again, like I said earlier, it's not ribbon cutting level type stuff, fancy projects. But I think there's some value here in appealing to kind of that core sentiment of taking care of the obvious, taking care of the maintenance needs, taking care of your own city streets before you go off and build something that's, something that's brand new. I think that has value. I think, there's other things that people talk about. They don't use transit, or, transit doesn't present as many opportunities for them as maybe urban communities. But what I can tell you is that there's an awful lot of rural communities out there that have some type of shuttle connection now that they didn't have prior to the 2017 package that initially started the payroll tax bump for increasing public transit across the state. So those communities in rural areas that took advantage of that, their citizens really appreciate it, especially those that don't have other funding options that are out there. I see another note in the chat about, complaints about, cost of gas and stuff is higher on the coast versus the valley. I'm not convinced that that's the case. It seems like every time I drive over to Lincoln City or Newport, the price of gas is 10 to 20 cents cheaper than it is in the valley. I think the other thing is when you look at the fluctuations on the gas prices that are out there, it's incredibly elastic. If you're in your own community, and you look at your different gas stations, I can tell you that I can drive, a mile and a half or 2 miles down 99W and see about a 40 or 50 cent gas price difference for the same product. So I think the basics here come down to, at least with a gas tax, you're going to get some investment back in the home team. When you are dealing with a 5-cent bump over a day, or 10 cents over a week, or 20 cents over a couple of weeks with the market, none of those increases go back to the community. None of those help pay for infrastructure. And, again, ultimately, at the end of the day here, if they want to get a transportation package out, it costs money. And transportation investment and infrastructure isn't cheap. And I think that's a tough sell, but I know everybody out there is doing their very best to try to convince people this is important.
Jim, also as a reminder, can you advise of what may be forthcoming with relation to the transportation package, in terms of any formal discussion or hearings in the Capitol?
It's scheduled for a work session today. And, those are I'll say the committee amendments that they plan on moving through. There's 20 plus in the queue, probably a few more before the 2:30 work session today. But from what I understand, they're going to try to move the committee amendments through the process, some technical changes and stuff here and there. I don't know if there's going to be anything substantive that's going to reduce the fee structure or reduce the registration fees, as an example. That may well be some kind of a negotiated conversation here before the end of the session.
So we're literally talking about, it's 12:43. As soon as we wrap up here, the request is get on the keyboard, pick up the cell phone, time to start reaching out.
Yeah. And honestly, your communication with folks doesn't need to be that difficult, or that detailed. Transportation is really important to us. We need to make sure we get a transportation package going forward. We're really not talking about numbers in this thing, but I think the best kind of numbers that you can share with them is what this package is capable of doing in their own community for their own constituents.
Okay, let's continue on to see if there are other questions we can address. I don't know that I explained earlier. Simply, you can raise your hand here in Zoom. There's an option to do that, or simply post your question in the chat. It's 12:44. We are going to wrap up this call no later than 1 o'clock, but we'll hang out for a little bit here just to see if any other additional questions come in. I'll also just use this opportunity to remind you that as of today, we are scheduled to do what would basically be the final Friday webinar of the legislative session next Friday, the 27th at 12 o'clock. But given the nature of things, that's all basically in flux. We'll keep you posted as to whether that's going to happen. We mentioned this last week as well. Later on in the summer, you can expect us to convene a sort of a special edition of one of these Friday webinars, which will be a more comprehensive recap of the legislative session and specifically focusing on legislation that has direct impact or direct action requirements for our member cities. Jim, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we can probably call it a week. And I know you and your team have things they need to get to immediately. So thank you all for your reporting and your ongoing work on behalf of our member cities this week and, well, probably over the weekend and into next week. And I want to thank all of our cities for participating and for everything that you all are doing in your individual communities. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and we will be in touch as information becomes available. So long.